Hi, welcome to DevBrew. This is where indie developers send their games, and I do my best to provide feedback for their game design. My name is Devon, and today we're looking at a game called Survive Into Night. It was developed by Genetics Studio and was submitted to us by PJ. Now, from what I've played, this game seems to be a survival game, survival horror. I wouldn't call it horror. It has horror elements in it. Anyway, it's survival. It's kind of story-driven. But you go around and you kind of collect things to craft to stay alive, and you fight zombies, and yeah. So the footage you're seeing is from version 0.12 of the game, and if you'd like to play it, there is a link in the description. If you watched DevBrew last week, then you probably already played this game. Kudos to you. And if you didn't, then shame on you. What are you doing? Get out of here. Anyway, so that's what this game is. We're gonna take a look at this. Let's go. This is what the kids call iced coffee. The way I'm going to go about this analysis is to play you guys some of the footage that I recorded of myself in my first playthrough, and then we're going to talk about some of the elements that popped out to me, game design wise. Okay, so this is the first scene of the game where we assume the role of this dude here. You walk around, it says use WASD keys to walk around, move the cursor to move your aim or whatever. There's two different ways to control the game, one with the mouse and keyboard and one with the controller. I use the mouse and keyboard first and the controller second. I really like the controller. The controller feels really, really good to do this. So the first thing I want to talk about are these prompts. So this is the first little contextual prompt that we have here. It says, use the WASD keys to walk around, blah, blah, blah. It basically just tells you what to do, right? This is half silent tutorial, half just telling the player what to do. But what's nice about these prompts is they're contextual, right? So as soon as you come up to another trigger up here, about right here, then you have another prompt. It says, use the shift key to sprint and press the F key to turn your flashlight on and off. So what's nice about this, about the text prompts, is that they're telling you things increment by increment. They're not shoving all of these controls to you, right at the face of the game. They're introducing to you little bit by little bit, and so that by the end of the entire first sequence here, you know exactly what you can do, and you're not confused at all, which is great. That's what games should do. All right, so as we go across these train tracks, or down the train tracks here, we come across a knife, or the backstabber as it's called. I really like these little text things that pop up that say exactly what the item is when you're over it, because that's the way it is for every item in the game. It's really nice. I know when I've tried to make things in Unity, I've done that same thing where the text just pops up when you enter the trigger zone. And for some reason, a lot of game developers don't do that. I'm not sure why, because I really like that. I don't like having to press a button, to make the text pop up. Just show me what it is. So that's really nice. I like that. Okay, and this whole time we're hearing a kind of gargled radio in the background that's giving us basically the exposition of the game.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country.
It's nice to have that in the background so that it's just something that you can kind of pay attention to. It gives a really nice tone to the game also. It's not forced down your throat. You don't have to read anything as you go into the game. It's just there for you to experience. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is this kind of little corridor entrance place. So this is all, part of the intro of the game, still teaching you everything. So as you can see right here, we have a level design that's very simple. It's just a path that's going straight. There's nothing that's in your way though. There's no barrier for you though. The only, soft barrier, I'll call it a soft barrier, are these trees, right? These trees are here, and you can go interact with the trees. You can go past the trees if you want. But what's nice about it is it's just kind of guiding the player. It's slightly suggesting that you should go this way. It's not a hard line. It's not saying you must go this way. It's just kind of suggesting it. And what's nice about that is it kind of gives the player who likes a bit more freedom, a bit more control in their game. It makes them feel nice during this whole thing, that they're not forced to go anywhere and they're not forced to do any kind of tutorial. It's just subtly guided, and that's really nice. I really like that. And then the first thing that pops up here is our zombie guy. So this is really nice. The zombie here is really slow. He's the slowest zombie that I think is in the game, and very intentional. You know, it's to introduce the player to zombies. So this is the first zombie you come across, and like me, I was just like, well, I'm not so sure about you, I should back up. But he's super slow, and so you just go, oh, I'm gonna try to kill you, and there you go, one hit. And it's really nice. It's just showing the player exactly what you got to do, and now you know how to kill zombies. Now, of course, the other zombies aren't going to be that easy, but now you know. So good stuff. And then we're still continuing with the textual prompts here, where it says, you know, use the middle mouse button to cycle through your active items, and then press the left mouse button to use an item. And we'll talk about those items later, these equipped items. So then you keep going and you pick up ammo for a weapon and the weapon itself, and you're handed just all three weapons here, an AR, a shotgun, and a pistol. And then you can immediately practice on a zombie, because there's a zombie right there, and again, it's a really slow one. And there's more ammo even for you right there. So it's giving you some things right here. It's saying, hey, why don't you practice a little bit? And none of it is directly told to you, it's just kind of implied. So you go ahead and try it, and that's great. That's really good stuff. That's great communication. So then we come to the church, which is your safe haven, and it's basically the introduction to the open world that you have here. So the church is kind of like your base camp, right? Your safe haven, or your sanctuary, if you will. And it says right here, press the I key to open your backpack and view current objectives and tasks. And you're presented with this number. So this is the screen. This is your inventory screen, and the inventory has so many things. So you have your current task, right? The thing that you're doing right at this moment, and then you have your survival tips that are coming up, and then you have the exit game button, then you have 40 slots for all different kinds of objects and items that you find. You have your ammo, you have your material resources used for crafting, you have achievements, and you have all of your bars. Of course, your bars are not only on this screen, but also, you know, in your active screen. And then you have your map in the giant middle part. It's a lot of information. For me, I think it's a bit too much information to understand right at the get-go. I wouldn't want a tutorial for all of this, but I certainly would want to somehow be introduced to it bit by bit, because there is a lot of stuff here. And I remember my first time playing through, when I got to the screen, I was just like, okay, let me spend some time here and try to figure out everything, you know. And eventually I kind of just went about my way and started to experiment with everything. At this point, you don't know what items recycled means, and you don't know what ammo resources means. I mean, is that just ammo? You're not sure what some of these achievements are. You're not sure what some of these material resources are. There's certainly some room for the player to discover stuff on their own. I'm one to like to introduce things bit by bit, because I feel like you can get a better grip on things that way. If I were to suggest something here, I think what I would suggest is to only have things pop up in the inventory screen when they're necessary, or at least in the beginning here. So like when you press I, maybe only the map comes up in the very beginning, maybe just your map and your items, or maybe when you go to the recycling thing later on, then you can bring up the material resources, or maybe when you collect the resource and that's when it comes up. I don't know. I would want to introduce some things, you know, bit by bit, because that's a lot of stuff to see all at once. Or maybe it's in tabs or menus or something like that. I like that it's all accessible right here, but yeah, it's a lot of stuff. You notice something here when I'm entering the building. The walls go invisible when you enter a door. It's like you can't really see where the doors are, and that was a bit confusing some of the times. And then like right here, I just walked straight into that and didn't realize it was a barrier. So some of the level design here is a bit strange. I would make the doors a lot more noticeable, because later on in the game, when I start like running away from zombies, or my thirst is really low, or I gotta get something really quickly, and I start having trouble with trying to find the entrance to a building, you know, you don't want that kind of thing to happen. You want that thing to be secondary. You know, that's just already in your mind. You don't want to have to try to figure it out also. And then we have our recycle and crafting table. So right here, when you get to the recycling bin, this little thing pops up where it says exactly what you can do with the recycling bin. I was a bit confused on it. I don't know if it's just me, but I was a bit confused on what the recycle bin actually did, probably because there wasn't a whole lot of feedback. So what you're supposed to do with the recycle bin is to gather some supplies, like wood, soda cans, or whatever, and break them down into materials that you can then use for crafting later on. So you basically have something to break down your materials and then something to build material. And it's interesting that they're separate tables. I'm not sure if it's necessary to have them completely separate systems, but I'm not arguing against it. It's just, that's the way it is. That's fine. So this was my first time opening the crafting table here, and immediately you can see that we have the red icons and the clear icons. So that's pretty obvious for me as a gamer, you know, someone who knows about video game tropes. Usually things are red when they're inaccessible and not red when they are accessible. So here I understood immediately that I could craft these things, but I couldn't craft these things. What was a little confusing about that though is I wasn't sure what would happen if I clicked on the things that I could craft. I didn't know what kind of materials it would take. I didn't know what kind of materials that I had on me already. And all these things are already communicated, like the materials you already have on you are right here. It says material resources, right? And then it says the materials that this thing requires to build right here. So all the information up there is right there, right up front. But so like right here, I went to craft a water bottle, and right there, I crafted it. And now I don't have enough resources to craft another one. So I don't know what just happened. At least when I played this, I knew that I crafted a water bottle, but I wasn't sure like what materials it used. So obviously the materials did go down, right? My materials did change. I now have less water and less plastic than I did before, but it wasn't obvious to me. And that's what I would like to see right here, is when material resources are used, to have some sort of obvious thing that happens where they blink or they get bigger or they get highlighted or they change color, something very obvious so that the player understands, oh, I just used that stuff, right? You want to make sure that the player understands exactly what they're spending, especially, you know, if you're managing resources, maybe even have like a suggestion of some sort, you know, when you craft for the first time, like, here, try crafting a water bottle or something like that, just so the player, again, understands. We had all these really nice subtle guides in the beginning to introduce, you know, the gameplay of shooting and collecting supplies, but right here we don't really have a tutorial of how to craft yet or how to recycle. So I would like to see something like that to make it more clear to the player. Obviously the stuff that I'm talking about, you know, this game isn't finished yet, so I'm not criticizing the game. I'm just, you know, giving feedback of what I would like to see. I really like this prompt right here where it says Survivor's Guide. Hear those bells? Every night the church bells will ring as a warning that the larger hordes are coming into town. Find somewhere safe to shelter until daylight. I really, really like that, because what that did to me, specifically to me, was freaked me out every time that the bells would ring. I'm just like, I remembered that prompt and I was like, oh no, I gotta get inside. And I didn't actually come across any big hordes, and I know that there was a newer update to the game, so perhaps that's something that you addressed, but yeah, that worked really well, so I applaud you on that. That was really cool. So something I want to talk about here is the zombies when they recognize you. So this zombie is looking off into the distance here, and as soon as I enter here, boom, he sees me. Now what's cool about this is that this little thing right here, this little triangle that pops up, is showing me that the zombie has seen me or knows that I'm around, so he turns around and tries to get at me. What's really nice about that is that it informs me, the player, that they know I'm coming, which allows me to strategize, because if that wasn't there, then, you know, whenever a zombie just turns around, it might see me, it might not see me, I wouldn't know. Maybe I'm wasting resources by trying to kill the zombie at the time, but it's nice to understand this kind of thing. So I really appreciate that. That's really nice. Also, a thing that I want to talk about is juicing. So if you're a developer, you probably understand what juicing up a game means. It basically means to make your game feel good, feel better. So just beefing up some aesthetics that make responsiveness. I like the idea that we're going for here when we kill zombies, because it feels a little bit more juiced than what I would imagine. So when you kill a zombie, at least with a knife right here, boom, right here, the the zombie explodes and the limbs fly apart. So if we want to look, let's look at that again. So right here, we can see, boom, it flies apart. And he says a comment also. So that comment and then the limbs flying apart is all a good indicator of death, and it makes me feel like I have done something in the world, and it's nice. It's really, really good. So I like that. Okay, so another thing about that juicing stuff is when right here I have the AR and I'm taking down zombies right here. That is such a cool effect. I love that effect so much. What's nice about it is it's telling me, the player, that something is happening, right? So the way you make guns feel good in games is to give a lot of feedback to the player to understand what exactly is happening in the game. So at this moment, we have muzzle flashes that are actually lighting up the environment, which is really cool. But also we have screen shakes that are happening. So you can see right here, you can feel the gunshots even though they're not making any sound at this moment. But the sounds are really good also that are in this game. You have the sound, you have the light, and you have the screen shake. It's all really good to make the gun feel really good, and all the guns in here feel that good. These boxes could use some juice because they really just, they feel like cardboard boxes, or actually they feel more like balloons, where they just kind of disappear. You know, I would like to see maybe some particle effects or something like that. You have a little bit of smoke coming up, but it really just feels like, you know, you're popping balloons. So the next thing I want to talk about is the transitions between cells. So the way this whole game works with the navigation is this whole area is not really an open world. It's a, I mean, it is an open world, but it's divided into cells basically. So if you imagine like a grid over the top of this whole thing, so something like that. This is the way that the game works. So when you're going through these roads here, these roads are the only way that you can cross over into different cells. So you can't get from here to here by going in this direction right here, or this direction, or this direction, or this direction. You have to find a road. So right here, you would have to go over here and then to that road, and then that's where you end up. So you have to use paths and roads to get across these cells. So that's how you travel in this game. What's nice about this is that it creates a way to easily navigate wherever you're going. What's not so good about this though is when you come across like times like this where I just wanted to go up, I'm just like, oh wait, I can't go that way. It's an invisible wall basically. And when you're fighting off like zombies and you're running away from them and you're just in a hurry to get away, you're not really looking for a road, you're just trying to look for a way to escape. And so when you come across that invisible wall and it doesn't go anywhere and you're trying to figure out what's going on, oh right, I can't do that. It's like another step that the player has to make, another mental step. So this cell operation is nice for navigation, but I don't really like it for like the action heavy stuff. So I would like to see something that's like some sort of indicator that these are invisible walls, that they will actually stop you. So the best kind of thing I could think of would be actual walls, but it doesn't really make sense in this context. So if there was something like, I don't know, like a trigger here, that when the player comes over here, then suddenly like a barrier highlights or something like that, saying that, you know, it's just showing that you can't go that way because you need to follow a road, you know, something like that to let the player understand that they cannot go that way. There's an invisible wall here, look for a road. You know, something more obvious would be nice. So another thing that's really nice about this, about the UI, I don't know, about the HUD, about objects on the screen, is when the zombies hurt you, it's very obvious, like right here, boom. Like I understand immediately what has happened. I'm like, something's happening, I'm getting hurt. So what's interesting about this is that this is a top-down game and you don't usually see on-screen effects for top-down stuff. But I really like it because it lets me know immediately what's happening, and so that's nice. I like that. One thing I want to point out is the flashlight. So you can see here that we have a flashlight meter, and that's how much power our flashlight has left. And this was my first playthrough, so I used it all the time because I didn't know I was using it for the longest time actually. But when you do use it, there's not a whole lot it does for you. It's a cool lighting effect. But it doesn't really seem to be helpful at all, because as you can see right here, this is about as dark as it gets, and you can still see everything, and that's fair because you should be able to do that. But when you activate the flashlight, it doesn't, I mean, it lights up in front of you, but just so much. It's not really helpful. Like I can see this zombie here, so why am I wasting resources for my flashlight? I in my second playthrough, I just didn't use my flashlight at all. I just don't really see the point of having a flashlight other than it looking interesting. Maybe if you used it, maybe have like a bigger area that you could see, or maybe like an even darker night, and just your flashlight would help you see, but it has to be like wider. Otherwise it would feel like really unfair. Anyway, that's just my opinion. I didn't feel like it helped me at all. All right, so something I want to talk about is these active items, which are these little things right here, quick something, whatever it is. These are equipped items. These are items that you have immediate access to. Now, I like that, right? I mean, it's nice to have equipped items, but what's weird about them is that they populate like as soon as you pick up an item. So for example, right here, I'm trying to collect a bunch of wood, and so I'm collecting wood, and as soon as I try to hit this thing, then he says, "Can't use that right now. Can't use that right now. Can't use that right now. Can't use it right now." I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, oh, I see. It's because I have a wooden plank highlighted right there. As you can see, this little highlight around the box. So what's strange about that, right, is that you're trying to pick up supplies, but then suddenly he can't pick up anything. And it turns out it's because what you're doing is you're trying to break open these things, these benches or trees or boxes or whatever, trying to get stuff. But what you're actually doing is using your melee attack. And your melee attack is what happens when you have nothing selected and you just click. So when you click something and you have nothing selected, then you punch. But when you're clicking and you have a board selected, like I do right there, "Can't use that right now," then he's trying to use the board. It doesn't feel good to do that. And it's because the mentality in my head as I'm playing this game is that I'm attacking, and I'm not using an item. What I would like to see is something like either a dedicated melee button, or use these like quick draw items a little bit differently, to where we have just weapons show up here, or maybe two of these cells for just weapons and 2 of these cells for just food, or something like that. Because another thing with food is that you can accidentally eat your food. So when you have a food item that you pick up and it happens right there, and you try to punch again, because I was in the mindset of I'm just punching, then he'll punch, he'll pick up a food, and then he'll eat it and then keep going, and I'm just like, oh wait, what did I do? Did I eat an item? And sure enough, I did, and it's because I keep clicking, right? Because you're hunting for objects a lot in this game. You're picking up supplies a whole lot, so it makes sense to have something like a dedicated melee button. I don't know if this is a bug. When you're going around here, you can punch trees, and they split up into wood, which is pretty cool. But when you punch trees, it takes a lot less time to break them than it does with a gun. Like I can shoot at these a lot with a gun, and it takes a lot of shots. But with punching, I just gotta punch a couple times and it's done. I felt like it probably shouldn't be that way. In the inventory screen, we have cells that are not stackable. Each of these cells have the capacity to hold 1 item. So as you can see, I have a lot of boards in here, and they're taking up a lot of space in my inventory. So something that I think the inventory should be doing is you should have an inventory that reiterates the purpose of your game. So if you remember some really good inventory systems like in Resident Evil 4, what it does is it reiterates the theme of the game, or reiterates the tone of the game, which is you have to be really careful, right? You have to be really methodical about the things that you're doing. Same with something like Dark Souls, where you have an inventory that holds a bunch, but everything that you have will add more weight to you. So you have to be methodical about your approach. And those are games that focus on methodical approaches to things. Now, if you want like more of an action feel, something that you just have a ton of stuff, for example, Doom is a good game that, it feels like we can carry a ton of weapons, and we can carry that many because it reiterates the theme of the game, which is you're very powerful and you have access to all these weapons, and you can just use them whenever you want, because that because that's what you're there to do. You're there to use as many weapons as you can. You're not there for a methodical approach. You're there to be fast and destroy as everything. Other inventory screens like Zelda Breath of the Wild has items that you can stack, but you can't stack weapons. In games like Animal Crossing, you can stack almost everything, except you have limited numbers of stacks that you can do. So the reason why all those games have that is, again, to reiterate their purpose. For Animal Crossing, you have a lot of things that you might want to carry at any given time, because you got to use a lot of those things to customize a bunch of things. So it wouldn't make sense in Animal Crossing to just carry one item at a time. So in here, I feel like we have an inventory that's just kind of plain, just kind of there. I would like to see stacking on these guys specifically, the not just the boards, but like supplies that you have. And I imagine what you wanted to do was keep the person from, like, you know, hoarding like a ton of health or a ton of water bottles or something like that, so that they didn't break the system of the game, so they didn't break the balance. But I think what would work is if you know, only stacked supplies and didn't stack things like bandages or things like water bottles, so that you can still have that strategic nature in there. But some things like materials, like the $20 bills that you pick up, or the boards that you pick up, the things that you have to go to recycle anyway, like broken weapons also, since you have to bring them back to the recycling bin, it makes sense to be able to stack them, because who cares how many you have. There's even missions that you have in here where you have to go and you have to get a ton of stuff, so like it would make sense to have those things stack. So I want to talk a little bit about these meters right here in the corner here. These meters are meant to be resource management, right? It's to help you have an idea of survival around the game, or at least that's what I think it is. It helps give the impression that you have precious stuff and that you have to be careful with your decisions and be methodical about some of the things that you're doing. But the way that it goes about decreasing your stats is a little bit strange. So your health here, whenever you get attacked by something, your health drops, but also your maximum health drops. One of the things that you do for game design to analyze game design is you ask the reason why certain mechanics are in place. So for a health meter, we would ask ourselves, you know, why do we have a health meter in our game? If you imagine the arcade days, when someone plays an arcade game, they insert a bunch of quarters and they have some lives that they're able to use. And that's basically telling the player, well, you have this many errors that you can do, then it's game over, right? So a health meter is basically the same thing, where you can say you have this many errors that you can do until it's game over. But with the health meter, it's a lot more nuanced, right? Some of the enemies deal a lot more damage. Some enemies don't deal so much damage. Sometimes you lose health for things that are not enemies. So you have to ask yourself why you're putting a health meter in your game. And in this instance, I would want to ask, why are we minimizing the maximum amount of health in the game? So the health in this instance, right, we're telling the player this is how many errors that you can make. Now, if we shrink the amount of maximum health that the character has, we're saying now that the player cannot make as many mistakes as they could before. It's encouraging the player to not get into as many conflicts as before, to basically be very, very careful and do not risk so much. Again, those mechanics are reiterating the purpose of the game. So it really depends on what you're trying to do with the game. The other thing is, I don't think the maximum health should shrink at the same time as getting hurt. To me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for that to happen, because it effectively tells me that we're punishing the player two different ways at the same time. I would rather see something like the player getting punished again for something else that they did. So for example, maybe after their health, you know, goes beyond a certain threshold, then that's when they start losing the maximum health. Or if they start getting hurt too many times in a row, like in a certain amount of time, then that's when their max, you know, goes down. Like, we're punishing the player because they did something wrong, more than just an error. But yeah, I think that's something that you could do with the health meter that I think would make more sense. So another thing is with stamina, right? Stamina is to manage how many times the player can attack at once, or how long they can sprint for, because you have a cooldown thing that happens with the stamina where your stamina fills back up. So what that cooldown is for is to allow the player some waiting time before they can do that thing again. And that's again to control the amount of things that the player can do. With these kinds of mechanics, you're encouraging the player to play a certain way. I like the way that stamina works in this game just as a meter, because it tells me that I have a limited resource of of attacking or sprinting, and I can't use it all the time. Otherwise, it would effectively make me invincible against the zombies. I could just, attack all the time forever, or I could just run away from them forever, but I can't, right? Because that's the whole point of the game. The stamina in this game operates kind of the same way the health does, where the maximum amount of stamina diminishes when you're using it. Again, it feels like you're punishing the player twice. It feels like we're saying, okay, you can use some stamina, but just because you're using it, you're gonna have less of it. That feels kind of weird to me, because you do have to use the stamina in order to, get items and stuff like that. And unless the ideal way to play the game is to never run into zombies, which I don't think is the ideal way. I think the ideal way is to have what you have already, with the stamina meter not shrinking at all from the maximum. If you do want to have that kind of harsh punishment, I think I would want to punish the player for a reason, not just because they're using stamina. Maybe you punish them for using too much stamina, so they use it all the way to the bottom, and then maybe it acts as a reserve, to where if you keep using it after you get to 0, then your maximum starts to lower. That would be to stop the player from using the stamina so much. Or you can have the stamina not have a cooldown, right? You could just basically have it to where it's effectively a health bar, where you can use it for sometimes, but then then it doesn't fill back up unless you eat a snack or something like that. Another way that I think would visually help your players understand that their maximums are lowering is if you had the meters here like shrink. So this meter is right here. Once your maximum shrinks, then the meter would be only this big, and then maybe it would only be this big. And then if you increase your maximum, then the meter gets bigger, right? Just like that does in most games. But I think that would help. So another thing I want to talk about is the kind of attacks that the zombies have. So it's not really apparent when the zombies are attacking. So if you see here, when I attack a zombie, I got bit right there, or it looks like I got scratched or something like that. But I didn't know why. Like, I just attacked as much as I could, and then it just seemed like he just randomly hurt me. Usually this is where you would find like an enemy animation would come into play, where the player can see when the enemy is like building up and then when they're going to launch their attack or something, because it helps the player strategize what they're going to do. A lot of times I found that the most effective way to kill the zombies in here, because I didn't know when they were attacking, I would just get a knife or a hammer and I would just wail on them, just not stop, because to me that was the most effective way of doing it. But again, I would like more strategy involved. I tried to strategize my attacks a little bit differently, by attacking and then backing away, but then it seemed like they could just attack me anyway. So it was really hard for me to strategize without seeing exactly when the zombies would attack. One thing that I really enjoyed about this game was the act of scavenging, and it's because it feels much more like I'm scavenging more than like other 3D games would. And it's because in those like really detailed 3D games, you have certain objects that you can pick up that are like glowing or something like that, or certain objects that you can break to find supplies, like in Skyrim or something. Because the aesthetic in this game is so simplistic, it's really cool to go around like this whole place where everything looks the same and some of it gives you items. I really like that idea, because it feels like I'm a scavenger. It feels like I'm actually taking part in the world, not just like it doesn't feel like I'm just being guided. In those other games, in those AAA games, what we have is like beautiful worlds, but then it's like, oh, you can touch these things, you can interact with these things. It's like I'm a kid that they're talking to. It's like, hey, be careful, don't touch everything, just touch these things. It's okay to touch these things. So in here, it really feels like I'm taking control, and it feels like that I'm able to scavenge almost anything. And I like where I can do that. I can go to like this fence right here and just break it apart. Like, I just love that. Or you can break apart like the couches that are inside houses and stuff. That's really cool. So that's all I have for today. Thank you, PJ, for submitting this game. I had a whole lot of fun playing it. There were times where I just played it just for myself without analyzing. It was just a lot of fun to play it. Next week, we're taking a look at a game called MPDC, which stands for Multiplayer Dungeon Crawler, I think. And there is a link for that in the description. You can play it right now, and then you'll be up to date next week. And then when I talk about the game, you won't be super confused, so that'll be nice. Yeah, if you like this video, please give it a like, sub, all those fun things. So that's it. And as always, adios amigos.